Okay, so my name's Steve, and when I was thinking about this, I've been fortunate enough over the past 14 years to be a mentor and a mentee, but I didn't necessarily feel I was qualified to provide advice and top tips on mentoring. So I thought, who could we go to get solid, wise advice? And I thought, grandparents. They're always the safe bet. So I've renamed this talk, Wise Advice That We Would Probably Receive from the Grandparents of the World to Guide Us in Our Mentoring Relationships. And being a good UX professional, I created some personas to help us with this. So we're going to start off with Joe, and Joe is from Massachusetts. And I think that Joe would probably want to start by saying a wise man knows his limitations. And I think what he's saying here is establish, are you the right person for the job? Now, I believe that everybody can learn something from anyone, but are we necessarily in the best position to be a mentor for somebody? So we want to, do we have the right level of rapport with the person? Do we have the right knowledge and experience? We don't have to be mentoring gurus, as we've discussed. I think anybody can mentor, but I think you've got to question whether you're in the right position to provide the best advice. And Bob mentioned why being a manager could or could not be a good idea. Next, we've got Samir, and Samir's from Chennai, just outside India. Just outside Chennai in India. And he would say you've got to draw a map before you make a journey. In other words, we need to have a plan for mentoring. So when I left Edinburgh to go to Atlanta last year for UPA, I needed to know where I was going and what stops I was making on the way. So, and in the same way for mentoring, we need to know what are our goals and how we're going to get there. Once we've got that information, we can set a plan together with the mentee and review it going forward. And as we review it, we can make slight course deviations or even U-turns if we feel that we're not necessarily heading towards the goals that we set out in the first place. This is Betty, and Betty's from London, and Betty would say that anyone who stops learning is old, whether they're 80 or 20. And what she's saying here is it works both ways. And when we get into a mentoring relationship, we need to understand what the mentee can bring to it, and people have already touched on this. And the mentee has the responsibility to work out what ideas and what plan they can bring to how they can share information with the mentor. Winston Churchill famously said, "I'm always ready to learn, but I don't always like to be taught." So as mentors, we need to be in a position to be open to the learning that the mentee can bring to the relationship. Next, we've got Lorenzo from Colombia, and I think he would say something a bit cryptic like, you've got to clear the trees before you can build the house. And cryptic grandparent saying, but I think what he's saying is we need to remove the obstacles before we start adding stuff to the mentee. So you've got business gurus who would say that somebody's performance is their potential minus interference. So one of our jobs as mentors is to remove that interference. And that interference, it can be lack of knowledge or skills. It can just be lack of confidence, self-doubt, or lack of consideration. Maybe they just haven't thought about something in a particular way. And one of our jobs is just to help them think through that. And this is Manuela, or Howling Mad Manuela to her friends. And she's from Italy. And she would say you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. And obviously she's saying we need to listen more than we speak. It's always tempting in a mentoring relationship to contribute the fruits of our wisdom to our mentee. But if we're going to effectively feed into a situation, we need to understand what that situation is. And before we can do that, we need to listen and listen actively. And finally, we've got Nick, and Nick spends his summers in the Bahamas. He looked quite familiar, but I couldn't quite place him. And he says something deep like, education is what you get when you read the fine print, and experience is what you get when you don't. And what he's saying is, we learn from our mistakes, and that's okay. And we need to create a mentoring environment where we celebrate success, but we also give permission to fail. And if we're going to help stretch our mentees, then we need to kind of encourage them outside of their comfort zone. And sometimes that can result in failure. And we need to help them understand that small failure is good, but also as a mentor, it's our job to help them prevent big failures, particularly if we're dealing with important clients. So it kind of works both ways. So hopefully a few nuggets of mentoring wisdom in there from our persona grandparents. Thank you very much.